In 1939, the British government announced that due to the international situation, television broadcasts were being suspended with immediate effect, and 10 days later war was declared. This not only drove away the visitors from Southend, but also meant that almost overnight, work on domestic radios and televisions at EKCO ceased, and the company turned its entire production capability over to the government, and in short order, the company initially found itself manufacturing military Type 19 tank radios. The plastics plant found itself working 24 hours a day making a wide variety of products, ranging from small Bakelite knobs to practice bombs, and the lamp manufacturing unit had been turned over to military valve manufacture, including the very specialized radar valves. The site at Southend was prepared for war, with surface air raid shelters having been built at various locations around the site, including one long slit trench down the length of the site. The deep shelters had already been built under the buildings erected in 1938, in accordance with the Air Raid Precautions Act of that year. Very quickly, the roofs of all the buildings were painted in camouflage paint, and security gates and barriers were erected at all the entrances to the site. EKCO began a program of building shelters, which were a mixture of surface and underground shelters across the whole of the site, and it's believed that some 26 shelters in total were built, that could provide shelter for the workforce, estimated to have been around 3,000 people at the time. These shelters played an important part in ensuring the safety of the staff throughout the war, and whilst no bombs were ever dropped on the factory, the firm was targeted by the Luftwaffe, as evidenced by a target map of the EKCO factories discovered in the archives after the war. The two main shelters could contain the drawing office and R&D staff. One was situated under the area which was used in the 1960s as a central car park on the site, and was the reason that area was never built up upon. The entrance was through a set of trapdoors set level with the ground, and down steep concrete steps into a large tunnel, which at that time had wooden benches and tables in place. The shelter behind the main assembly and production hall was designed to give quick access to all the workers, and it's believed to have been capable of holding up to 750 people. It was filled in sometime in the early 1950s, when building expansion work was being carried out for EKCO Plastics. These would become known as Buildings 22 and 23. The shelters were constructed using concrete pipes, which had a 2-meter or 6 foot 6 inches inside diameter. These were the same type that were used for large underground waterworks, and it's considered that these were used for speed of construction, as it would have been a relatively easy task to drop these pipes in sections into place once the trenches had been dug. The second difference is that there are blast and gas-proof heavy-gauge steel doors at each end and in the center to protect the people in the shelter. The shelter is divided into 3 sections, called galleries, and each gallery was protected from blast damage in the adjacent gallery by an anti-blast wall, as well as a blast door. There was a cleansing station at the bottom of the stairs at the foot of the entrance to the shelter, where people who had been contaminated with gas could have been treated and washed down before going into the shelter. In addition, by the base of the north end entrance, there was a fully equipped first aid room. Power room was situated just off the central gallery. The room was equipped with a diesel engine, which drove both a dynamo and an air pump. The shelter had its own power distribution panel, where the lighting power could be switched over to an emergency DC power supply from the diesel generator, should there be a mains failure. The air pump supplied forced air throughout the shelter via a series of outlet pipes, and were maintained at a positive pressure to ensure that the airflow was always outward, to stop any ingress of gas from outside. Passing through the power room, a small tunnel extension led to an escape hatch, which would have been used as the escape into the sports field adjacent to the factory. When the shelter was fully locked down during either a practice exercise or a real air raid was going on, the people inside had no means of knowing when a raid was over, and it was safe to venture out. Above each exit door, a red and green mica panel displayed the current status, in addition to a bell signal, all of which would have been operated from above ground. The people would have sat for long periods during an air raid, and in some discomfort. There would have been a lot of noise from the generator, and the constant hissing of the forced air supply. In a short period of time, it would have become hot and stuffy, and for many, it must have felt claustrophobic. The 3 shelters under buildings 10 and 12 were the longest, but had many changes of direction to deflect damage by blasts caused by bombs. Like all the other EKCO factories, a Home Guard detachment was formed at Southend during the Second World War, and Southend had their own platoon named the 1st Battalion Essex Home Guard B Company No. 9, EKCO, platoon, which comprised of around 150 men. Operationally, the company headquarters was an office within the main office building, and from there, the members were allocated their duties. The platoon was split up into 4 sections: the headquarters, the Vickers machine gun, the spigot mortar, and the general duties. The main duty of the EKCO platoon was patrolling and guarding the perimeter of the main works, which included the playing field, which had been fenced off with coils of barbed wire. All of the gates into and out of the site were guarded, and everybody had to show their identity or works passes. Like all Home Guard units nationwide, the EKCO Home Guard was stood down in December 1944, their job done. There were a series of parades to commemorate the role the Home Guard played in the nation's defense, and each member of the Home Guard received a letter or card thanking them for their services.